My sister cried at the attorney's office. Not when the numbers were read out loud. Not when the disbursement ledger was placed on the table. She cried when the attorney looked at her and said, very calmly, Miss Hartley, this account was never yours to access. I had heard Daphne cry my entire life. At Christmas when she didn't get what she wanted. At dinner when my mother corrected her. At her wedding, God, Phoebe. Especially at her wedding, when everything had to be perfect and tears were part of the performance. But this cry was different. This one was small. It came out of her before she could stop it, Keenthy. And then she pressed her lips together and looked at her husband, and he looked back at her with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in the 4 years they'd been married. He didn't reach for her hand, they. I looked down at the folder on the table, pale green, a little worn at the corners. My father had written my name on the tab in blue ink, in the careful block letters he used when something mattered. Rennie, Trust, Ivna. I had found that folder 7 months earlier in a box of his files, 2 weeks after his funeral. I almost didn't open it. I almost set it aside and told myself I'd deal with it later, they. The way you tell yourself things when grief is still loud and you don't have room for more. But I opened it, and then I sat at my father's kitchen table for a long time, reading a document I wasn't supposed to have found. That was how it started. Let me tell you the version of our family that made sense to everyone else. Ian. My parents, Dale and Carol Caldwell, raised 2 daughters in a suburb outside Charlotte, North Carolina. My father worked for 30 years as an insurance adjuster, Ebel. My mother was a dental hygienist until her knees gave out. They were not wealthy, but they were careful. They saved. They planned. They didn't talk about money at dinner, but money shaped everything at that table. Daphne was the oldest by 5 years. She was the one people noticed, tall, blonde, quick to laugh, the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and made it feel effortless. Daphne. She was always the one my parents introduced first at church, at school events, at the neighborhood 4th of July parties. This is Daphne, and then, a beat later, and her sister Renee. I was not resentful of Daphne when I was young. I want to be honest about that. I was different from her, and I knew it. I was quieter. I liked numbers. Yeepy. I spent most of high school running calculations in my head. Not because I was showing off, but because it genuinely calmed me down. There's something peaceful about a number that means exactly what it says it means. When Daphne graduated high school, she was accepted to a private university in Virginia. Tuition was around $28,000 a year at the time. My parents paid it without discussion. I remember thinking, they must have saved for this. I thought it was the plan. When I graduated 3 years later, my father sat me down and explained that money was tight. He said I was smart enough for a state school. And he meant it as a compliment, I believe, and that I could get loans for what wasn't covered. He said he was proud of me for being independent. He said it like independence was something I had chosen. I went to UNC Charlotte on a partial academic scholarship, worked 2 jobs, and graduated with $18,000 in student loan debt. I never complained about it. I just noticed, if you have ever been the child in your family who was trusted to handle things on your own, because someone decided early on that you were capable, you understand what it costs to be capable. It doesn't cost you the love. It costs you the accommodation. Every family has one child who gets the softness and one who gets the structure. Daphne got the softness. I got the structure. And for most of my adult life, I told myself that was fine. I built a career as a forensic accountant. I was good at it. I made more money than Daphne ever did, and I quietly paid off every cent of my loans by 32. I had a life. A good one. I was not sitting around being angry about my childhood. I promise you that. But then my father died in October, feebly. And I drove back to Charlotte to help my mother with the estate, and I found a pale green folder in a box of files in his study, and the number inside that folder did not match anything I had been told. My father was organized. That was one of the things I always respected about him. He kept records of everything. insurance documents, medical receipts, tax returns going back 15 years. Eat. He had a filing system in his study that my mother called his second brain, and she meant it affectionately. After the funeral, accuse, my mother asked me to go through his files and pull anything the attorney would need for the estate. She asked Daphne to handle the house and the personal items. That division made sense to everyone. I was the one with the financial background. Daphne was the one who could make decisions about sentimental things without turning them into a spreadsheet. So I sat in my father's study on a Thursday afternoon in November, working through his files, and I found the green folder. It was in the back of his bottom drawer, behind a set of folders for his vehicle registrations. The tab said Renee. Trust it. I sat for a moment, just looking at it. My parents had never mentioned a trust account to me. Not once. I thought, maybe this is something old. Maybe something they set up when I was a child and then let lapse. Maybe it was empty. Maybe it was just paperwork for an account that had held $40 in 1991 and been closed. I opened it. Inside was a trust agreement, a legitimate trust document drawn up through a regional brokerage firm, dated when I was 3 years old. My grandparents on my father's side had established it. They had both died before I turned 10, and I had no real memory of them managing money on my behalf. The trust named me as the sole beneficiary. The initial deposit was $15,000. Year B. That was not the number that made me stop. At the bottom of the folder was a quarterly statement, the most recent one before my father's death. EV. The statement showed the current account value after 35 years of compound growth. The balance was $94,200. I read it twice. Then I looked at the disbursement history on the second page. Between 2018 and 2021, 3 transfers had been made from the account: $22,000, $18,500, $26,500, total $67,000. None of those transfers went to an account in my name. I closed the folder. I sat very still for about a minute. Then I picked up my phone and called the brokerage firm listed on the statement. It was 4:30 on a Thursday, and I was not sure anyone would answer. Someone did. I asked them to confirm whether I was listed as the beneficiary on the account. The representative put me on hold for 3 minutes. When she came back, she said yes, I was the named beneficiary. She asked if I wanted to schedule an appointment to discuss the account. I said yes. I asked if she could tell me anything about the disbursements in 2018 through 2021. She said she couldn't discuss that over the phone, but that the records would be available at the appointment. I thanked her. I hung up. I put the folder in my bag, not my father's file box. And then I went to help my mother make dinner, and I did not say one word about what I had found. Here is something about forensic accounting that most people don't understand. It is almost never about one big lie. It is about a pattern. One number leads to another. One date doesn't match a receipt. One name appears where it shouldn't. You don't find fraud by looking for fraud. You find it by following everything that doesn't fit, one small piece at a time. I am telling you this because what I did next was not dramatic. It was slow and methodical, and, honestly, a little exhausting. I spent 3 days reviewing my father's financial records before I went to the brokerage appointment. I was not looking for anything in particular. I was looking for the shape of things, the pattern of how money moved through my family over the years. His bank statements going back 5 years, his credit card records, his tax returns, his estate account, which the attorney had set up the week after he died. 2 things came up. First, in March of 2018, my father had taken out a personal loan for $22,000 from a local credit union. He had paid it back over 3 years, use interest. The timing matched exactly with the first trust transfer. Why would he borrow $22,000 from a credit union if he had $94,000 sitting in a trust account? Unless the trust transfer hadn't been his idea. Unless it had already happened before he realized he needed the money. and he had quietly borrowed to cover it. Second, in July of 2018, 4 months after that loan, Daphne had her wedding. I have been to a lot of weddings. Daphne's was beautiful. The venue was a converted barn outside Charlotte, a popular one, I know the going rate. The flowers were elaborate, there was a live band, a plated dinner for 160 guests, and a photo booth with custom frames. She wore a dress she had described to me as, not crazy expensive, just a good find. I pulled the wedding venue's listed pricing from their website. Even at the lower end, that event would have cost between $35,000 and $45,000. Daphne was working as an office manager at the time. Her husband, Craig, was a newly licensed real estate agent. I had always assumed my parents had helped with the wedding costs. That was normal, and I hadn't asked. But I had never heard a number. Now I had one. And now I had a matching transfer from my trust account, dated February 2018, 5 months before the wedding. Before I tell you what I found at the brokerage appointment, I want you to remember something. This is the part of the story where most people would call their sister and demand an explanation. I understand that impulse. I felt it. But I have spent 12 years watching people make that mistake. You call before you have the full picture, and then you have a fight instead of a case. I was not ready for a fight. I was building a case. The brokerage appointment was on a Tuesday morning. I drove 40 minutes to their office in a business park on the south side of Charlotte, sat across from a trust account specialist named Gerald, and watched him pull up 35 years of account history on his monitor. Gerald was a careful man. He explained everything slowly and apologetically, the way people do when they sense the information is going to be upsetting. The trust had been established by my paternal grandparents in 1988. My father had been named as the trustee. As trustee, he had full authorization to manage the account until I turned 25. At which point, the trust was to post a trip to my control automatically, except it hadn't. Gerald showed me the documentation from 2005, when I turned 25. There should have been a formal trustee transition at that point. Instead, my father had submitted a form requesting a trustee extension, claiming that the beneficiary, me, had not yet contacted the firm to establish her access. The extension was granted routinely. Brokerage firms do this more often than they should. It's paperwork, and paperwork gets processed. My father had renewed that extension in 2010 and again in 2015. I turned 25 in 2005. I was never told the trust existed. I never knew to contact the firm, and my father, who loved me, I believe, had used that administrative gap to retain control of an account I didn't know I had. Now I had to figure out what he did with it, and whether he did it alone. Gerald walked me through the 3 disbursements. The 2018 transfer, $22,000, sent to a joint checking account. Gerald confirmed the account number. I wrote it down. The 2018 transfer, $18,005, same account. The 2021 transfer, $26,500, same account. I asked Gerald whether the account receiving those transfers was mine. He said no. He said the account was a joint checking account in the names of Daphne Marie Hartley and Craig Thomas Hartley. I wrote that down too. I thanked Gerald. I asked for printed copies of everything he had shown me. He gave them to me in a folder. White this time, not green, and I walked out to my car and sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes. I was not shaking, either. I want to be clear about that. I have been in enough fraud investigations to know what it feels like when the picture comes into focus. There is not usually anger in that moment. There is something closer to clarity, a settling, like a camera finding its focal length. My sister had received $67,000 from my trust account. My father had been the one to authorize the transfers, but Daphne was on that receiving account. She knew what was going into it. The question I needed to answer next was, how much did she know about where it came from? I drove back to my mother's house that afternoon. My mother was in the kitchen when I came in. She's a person who cooks when she's grieving, and she had been cooking steadily for 3 weeks. The counter had bread on it, and a pot of soup, and a pie she had started but not finished. I sat at the kitchen table and said, "Mom, I need to ask you something." She turned around. She had that look she gets, a measured look, Isni. The one that means she is deciding how to answer before she knows the question. I said, "Did you know Dad set up a trust account for me when I was little?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Either. Where did you find that?" "Not what trust account. Not I don't know what you're talking about." She said, "Where did you find that?" I told her about the folder. Ififi. She looked at the counter and started wiping it down with a dish towel, which is what she does when she is working out what to say. "Your father handled all the money," she said finally. "He always did." I asked her if she knew about the transfers to Daphne's account. She set the dish towel down. "Renee, your sister was trying to have a wedding. You know how much everything costs." "It was my money, Mom." "It was a trust account that nobody touched for 30 years. It was in my name." She looked at me then, not unkindly. "My mother is not a cruel person, She is a person who has spent her whole life smoothing things over, keeping the temperature down, making sure nobody had to feel too uncomfortable for too long. Your father made decisions for this family," she said. He did the best he could." I said, "I know he did, and I meant it. Whatever my father's choices, I believe he loved me. I believe he convinced himself that Daphne needed it more, that I would be fine, that someday he would explain it. He ran out of some days. I left my mother's house that evening without raising my voice. I did not call Daphne. I did not send a text, Gibi. I drove back to the house I was staying at, and I laid out every document I had collected on the dining room table, and I started organizing. 3 days later, my sister called me. "Mom says you found some old account paperwork," Daphne said. She had that casual tone, not alarmed, just checking in. "It was Dad's thing, Renee. He wanted to help with the wedding." "He wanted to help with the wedding," I said. "He knew you were fine. He knew you had your career, you had savings, Daphne." She paused. "Was it your idea or his?" Silence. Then, "I don't think we need to make this into something it isn't. I asked you a simple question. This is exactly what I'm talking about." Her voice shifted, that warmth that turns sharp when she doesn't get what she wants. "You're going to make this whole grieving period about money. Dad just died. Mom is devastated. And you're sitting there, you're a cute thing, turning everything into an investigation." "It is an investigation," I said. "I just haven't decided yet who I'm working for." I hung up. She called back twice. I did not answer. I had been treating this as a family matter. I needed to stop doing that. I called a probate attorney in Charlotte, someone I had worked with on a previous case, a woman named Sylvia Torres, who specialized in estate disputes and did not waste time on sentiment. I laid out everything I had. She listened without interrupting, which is how I knew she was taking it seriously. When I was done, she said, "The trust should have transitioned to you in 2005. The extensions your father filed were procedurally valid, but the disbursements, those are a different issue." A trustee can manage the account, but disbursements to third parties outside the trust terms require documented justification. "Were you ever asked to consent?" I said no. I had never been told the account existed. She said, "Then those transfers were unauthorized. Regardless of your father's intentions, those funds belonged to you. Your sister and her husband received $67,000 from an account they had no legal claim to." I asked what recourse I had through the estate. Sylvia said, "Daphne's portion of the estate can be reduced by the amount she received from the trust. And if she disputes that, you'll need the full disbursement history, the trust documents, and proof of where the money went." I had all of that, but then Sylvia said something I hadn't expected. She said, "Pull the joint account records for 2018 through 2021 if you can. I want to see how the money moved after it hit their checking account." Sometimes people move it again. I hadn't thought about that, either. I had the joint account number from the brokerage records. Through the estate subpoena process and a formal records request that Sylvia initiated, we obtained 3 years of statements for Daphne and Craig's joint checking account. The $22,000 arrived in February 2018. It left the account in 4 withdrawals over 6 weeks. 2 of them went to the wedding venue, one went to a florist. The last one, $4,800, went to a personal account in Daphne's name only. The 2019 transfer, $18,500, came in July. It left in 3 parts: a payment to a kitchen renovation contractor, a payment to a furniture store, and $3,200 to Daphne's personal account again. The 2021 to transfer, $26, $500. This one I stared at for a long time. It came in March 21. $14,000 went to a down payment account for a second property, an investment property that Daphne and Craig had purchased at Lake Norman, EP. I had been at their housewarming. I had brought a bottle of wine and admired the view of the water. I had not known I helped pay for it. The remaining $12,500 went directly to Daphne's personal account, so across 3 transfers totaling $67,000. Daphne had funneled roughly $20,500 into her own personal account, separate from Craig's, and used the rest for the wedding, their home renovation, and a down payment on a vacation property. That was not her father making a gift. That was a woman who understood exactly what was coming into that account and made deliberate choices about where it went. I put the documents in a new folder. This one was red. Sylvia scheduled the estate closing meeting for the first week of March, 4 months after my father's death. These meetings are usually quiet and procedural. You sit around a table with an attorney, sign some documents, discuss the distribution of assets, and go home. My mother was expecting that. Daphne arrived 20 minutes late. She came in with Craig, who was carrying her bag for her. A small, careful gesture of someone trying to appear supportive. She sat down across from me and gave me a brief smile. The kind of smile that says, "I hope we can be adults about this." Sylvia sat at the head of the table. She was polite and efficient. She walked through the standard estate items: the house, the savings account, the vehicle, the household contents. And then she said, "Before we finalize the distribution, there's a matter relating to a trust account established in Renee's name." Daphne looked at her coffee cup. Sylvia placed a copy of the trust documents on the table. Then the disbursement ledger. Then the joint account statements, highlighted in 3 places. She said, "Between 2018 and 2021, 3 disbursements totaling $67,000 were made from Renee's trust account to the joint account of Daphne and Craig Hartley. Under the terms of the trust and applicable North Carolina estate law, these disbursements were not authorized. Renee was not informed of the trust's existence and did not consent to any transfers. As part of the estate settlement, we are requesting that Daphne's share of the estate reflect a $67,000 offset, and that a formal repayment agreement be established for any remaining balance." Craig turned to look at Daphne. It was a small movement. He didn't say anything. He just turned his head slowly and she didn't look back at him. My mother said quietly, "Daphne." Daphne said, "Dad offered." "I didn't ask him to do anything," Sylvia said. "Messrs. Hartley, the account records show deposits from your father's trust transfers being subdivided and redirected to your personal account on 3 separate occasions. Can you explain those movements?" I was managing household finances. The transfers to your personal account totaled $20,500 over 3 years. Can you tell us what those funds were used for? Daphne's jaw tightened. I don't remember every transaction from. "We have the statements," I said. She looked at me then. For the first time since she walked in, I had not planned to say much at this meeting. Sylvia had told me to let her lead, and I had agreed. But I had been sitting across from my sister for 25 minutes watching her perform confusion. And I was done with the performance. Evil. Dad never told me about that account, I said. I found it in his files 2 weeks after his funeral, in a folder with my name on it. I had a trust account for 35 years and I never knew it existed. And $67. Count. Zozio's suit of it went to yours and Craig's checking account. And another 20,500 of it went just to you. Dad made that decision. Did he make the decision to put it in your personal account? She didn't answer. Gunne. Craig cleared his throat. He said, very carefully, how much of this is recoverable through the estate? Daphne looked at him like he had walked out of the room. Sylvia said, The estate assets will cover approximately $31,000 of the offset. The remaining balance would need to be addressed through a separate repayment structure. Craig said, and if we dispute it? Sylvia said, You're welcome to retain separate counsel. But the documentation is complete and the trust terms are clear. I would encourage you to consult with an attorney before deciding on a path. The room was quiet. My mother was looking at her hands. Craig uncapped a pen and said, What do we need to sign? Daphne said, Craig. Daphne. He said her name the way you say it when you mean stop. She stopped. You. After the main documents were signed, there was a short break. My mother went to the restroom. Craig stepped into the hallway to make a phone call. Sylvia was organizing papers at the end of the table. Daphne and I were alone. She said, I want you to know he told me you were okay. He said you were doing well and you didn't need it. I know, I said. He felt guilty. About the student loans, about everything. He wanted to do something that felt fair. Taking money from my account and giving it to you isn't fair, Daphne. She looked out the window. I know. That was it. Just. I know. I picked up the pale green folder. I had brought it with me, the original one, my father's, with my name in his handwriting. I held it for a moment and then I set it on the table between us. He kept this in the back of his bottom drawer for 30 years, I said. He wrote my name on it, he just never told me what was inside it. Daphne looked at the folder. She pressed her lips together. And then she cried. Not the performance from earlier. Something smaller. Something real. I didn't comfort her. I didn't tell her it was okay, but I didn't leave either. I sat there while she cried. Because she was still my sister, and because I understood, even then, that she had not invented the dynamic that allowed all of this to happen. She had just used it. Our father had created the conditions. She had stepped into them. That doesn't make it right. It doesn't make $67,000 disappear. But it is the true thing, and I have always preferred true things to comfortable ones. The repayment agreement was formally over the following 6 weeks. Daphne's share of my father's estate, approximately $31,000, was redirected entirely to me as partial restitution. For the remaining $36,000, she and Craig entered into a structured repayment plan, $1,000 a month for 3 years, secured against their investment property at Lake Norman, the property they had partially purchased with my money. I don't know what happened between Daphne and Craig after that meeting. I don't ask, and my mother doesn't tell me. I know they are still married. I know Daphne doesn't call me the way she used to. I know my mother has started treating me differently. Not warmer exactly, but more carefully, as if she is revising something in her head about who I am. I have not demanded an apology from anyone. What I wanted was not an apology. What I wanted was what was mine. And not just the money, the record. The acknowledgement that I existed in that account, that my grandparents had thought of me, that my name had been written on something 30 years ago, and it meant something. I have the trust account now. What remains after the disbursements, that $27,200, was transferred to my name in April. I used part of it to pay off my car. The rest I put in a high-yield savings account. It is not $94,000, but it is mine. People ask me sometimes whether I'm angry at my father. The honest answer is, I was, for a while. Not loudly. I didn't yell at a gravestone or have a breakdown in my car. I just carried it for a few months, This quiet, persistent grief that was partly about losing him and partly about understanding, in me, that he had seen me the same way everyone else had. As capable, as okay, as the one who could handle things. He wasn't wrong that I could handle things. He was wrong that handling things meant I didn't deserve the same consideration as Daphne. I think about the folder sometimes, pale green, a little worn at the corners. Bien. He kept it in his bottom drawer for 30 years. He wrote my name on it in careful block letters. He preserved those documents, the trust agreement, the quarterly statements, and he never threw them away. Even after the transfers. I don't know what that means. Maybe he intended to tell me eventually. Maybe he kept it because he felt guilty. Maybe he just couldn't bring himself to destroy something that had my name on it. I'll never know. What I know is what the records showed, and the records were patient. They waited 35 years in a quiet drawer, and they told the truth the moment someone thought to look. They always do. If you believe every lie leaves a paper trail, subscribe before the next record is opened. He wrote my name on that folder 30 years ago. He just never told me what was inside it.